Hello. Today General Hospital will reveal Drew had never imagined that the truth he unearthed about Judge Eva Heran would serve as the match that ignited a wildfire. One so consuming that it threatened to burn down every fragile foundation holding together their already fractured world. The evidence was undeniable. Heran had accepted bribes from Sidwell in exchange for altering the ruling in the bitter custody battle. It was not simply a moral failing, it was a calculated betrayal of justice, one that tilted the scales of family law in ways that devastated lives. Drew held this knowledge like a live weapon, one that could destroy not only Sidwell's credibility but also Michael's future as a father. He understood with chilling clarity what would follow if the truth ever became public. Michael would lose custody of Amelia and Wiley, and the children would be forced to live under Willow's roof. To the outside world, such an outcome might appear to be Willow's long-awaited victory, the prize she had fought for with her tears, her desperation, and her resilience. Yet to those who looked closer, the reality was far more tangled. Willow was already compromised, her soul knotted with contradictions, as she sank deeper into a destructive entanglement with Drew himself. What should have been a moment of triumph twisted into a grotesque paradox. Willow had dreamt of raising Amelia and Wiley, of being the constant presence in their lives, the mother who would shield them from the chaos that so often swirled around Port Charles. But Drew, the man she clung to for support, was also the very figure eroding her stability. Their affair, darkened by secrecy and guilt, cast a shadow over every step she took. It meant that even the possibility of victory was poisoned, because beneath it lay betrayal of her values, of her family ties, and of her own fragile sense of self. When the ground seemed most unstable, the universe delivered a blow that stripped away her last anchor. Judge Eva Heran was found dead. Murdered. The shock was seismic. The judge's death did more than eliminate a corrupted official. It obliterated Willow's last chance to secure legal custody. The bribery evidence Drew had discovered was suddenly irrelevant without Heran's testimony or official record. What had been a tenuous lifeline became nothing more than a noose that cinched tighter around Willow's throat. The courtroom, which once symbolized the possibility of redemption, was now sealed off forever. Her hope collapsed into an abyss, and with it came a profound unraveling of her spirit. Grief twisted quickly into rage, rage congealed into paranoia, and paranoia metastasized into obsession. Willow, once celebrated for her warmth, her empathy, her willingness to sacrifice herself for others, began to change in ways that horrified those around her. The gentle nurse who had nurtured patients with tireless compassion now erupted into fits of volatility. In the halls of General Hospital, her colleagues whispered in shock after she lashed out physically at a doctor who questioned her judgment. At home, she prowled through shadows, following those she suspected of conspiring against her. Her eyes, once soft with kindness, now carried a flicker of mania, and even friends who loved her struggled to recognize the woman they once trusted implicitly. Her instability was not merely the product of grief, but of the web of deceit binding her to Drew. He remained her paradox, the man who promised her restoration yet poisoned her life at its core. Drew dangled hope before her like bait, reminding her that together they could still find a way to bring Amelia and Wiley home. But beneath those promises lay betrayal of the deepest kind, for Willow knew though she refused to fully confront it that Drew had become entangled with Nina, her own mother. It was a betrayal that should have shattered their bond irrevocably, yet instead it deepened her dependence. In her fractured mental state, Willow could not let go. She despised Drew for what he represented, but she also saw him as the only key to unlocking the life she craved. He was her tormentor and her savior, her punishment and her promise. This dependence was its own cruel prison. Every time she looked at Drew, she saw the reflection of all she had lost, yet she also clung to him with a desperation that defied logic. He embodied both the sin that dragged her into darkness and the illusion of redemption she could not stop chasing. To leave him would mean abandoning the last fragile thread connecting her to her children, but to remain tethered meant submitting to a spiral that consumed her sanity piece by piece. The cost of this compromise grew daily. She sacrificed her peace of mind, her integrity, and even her professional credibility, all in the name of a reunion that slipped further from reach with every passing moment. Her deterioration was visible to everyone around her. Colleagues grew cautious, no longer trusting her with delicate cases. Friends whispered about interventions, about the possibility of Shady Brook, about whether Willow had crossed a line from grief into dangerous instability. Even Michael, once the pillar of her family ties, withdrew, unable to reconcile the woman before him with the gentle soul he had once admired. Willow's obsession with finding answers about Heran's death only deepened the chasm. She convinced herself that if she could uncover the truth, she could restore what had been taken from her. Nights turned into sleepless vigils, with her scouring every scrap of rumor, chasing every shadow that hinted at conspiracy. But as Willow delved deeper into the mystery of Eva Heran's murder, she stumbled upon fragments that pointed toward something far more sinister than a single act of revenge. The threads led back not just to Sidwell, but to a wider network of power and manipulation, a network in which Drew's hands were not as clean as she wanted to believe. Each discovery cut deeper, eroding her illusions, and forcing her to acknowledge that the man she clung to may have been complicit in the very machinations that destroyed her life. It was a revelation so unbearable that she teetered between denial and fury, unable to fully process the enormity of it. The Willow that Port Charles had once known was gone. In her place stood a woman transformed by grief into something unrecognizable, woman driven by vengeance as much as by love, consumed by obsession as much as by despair. Her kindness had curdled into suspicion, her patience into rage, her compassion into an icy calculation. The murder of Eva Heran had not only stolen her legal hope but had reshaped her entirely, pushing her past a threshold she might never return from. The questions now weighed heavily over everything. Could Willow still be saved from herself? Could she break free from Drew's toxic grip before she lost the last fragments of her sanity? Or had her transformation already sealed her fate, turning her into the very danger she once fought against? For those watching her descent, the tragedy was no longer just about custody or betrayal. It was about whether Willow Tate's soul could survive the darkness she had allowed to take root. Willow's unraveling did not begin with the death of Judge Eva Heran, but that violent moment was the fracture that finally split her world into pieces too sharp to ever mend. Her grief was immediate, raw, and animalistic. But layered beneath it was an unmistakable sense that something about this murder did not fit into the neat lines of vengeance or corruption that others wanted to believe. Willow could not shake the feeling that Judge Heran's death was not a simple silencing, but a surgical elimination, the kind of killing that reeked of strategy and design. When she began to pull at the threads, what she uncovered was not merely a cover-up, it was a tapestry woven with power, deceit, and betrayal, stretching far beyond anything she had been prepared to face. The first whispers came in the form of inconsistencies in the official reports. Heran had been found in circumstances far too clean, the details arranged as though someone wanted the story to be swallowed whole without question. But Willow could not stop herself from questioning. She had lived long enough inside institutions, hospitals, courtrooms to recognize when a system had been manipulated. Her instincts told her that Sidwell, the man who had bribed Heran, was never meant to be the final name in this saga. He was a convenient villain, the kind the world could point at and say, "There, that is the rot in the system." But Willow's gut, sharpened by her desperation, told her that Sidwell was only a pawn on a board where the real players remained hidden. And it was in following those shadows that Drew's name began to reappear, faintly at first, then with a weight that Willow could no longer dismiss. She remembered conversations that no longer made sense, reassurances that felt too perfectly timed, gaps in his stories that once seemed trivial but now loomed large. Every memory with him became a riddle, and as she pieced them together, she began to see the shape of a truth that terrified her. Drew had not been her savior at all. He had been part of the machinery ensuring her destruction. Whether by choice, by coercion, or by his own hunger for power, Drew had been complicit in ensuring Judge Heran could not speak, in ensuring the custody battle would remain a cage that Willow could never escape. This revelation was more devastating than any legal loss. To realize that the man she had trusted with her heart, her grief, her sanity, might also be the one standing between her and her children, it was a betrayal so total that it hollowed her out. For days, she could not eat or sleep. She wandered through her apartment like a ghost, hearing phantom voices, seeing shadows that may or may not have been there. Her friends noticed the change but did not understand it. To them, she was still grieving, still spiraling from the judge's murder. But inside, Willow knew she had crossed into something far darker, the collision of her love and her hate into one singular, suffocating obsession. Her paranoia grew. She began following Drew when he left without explanation, memorizing the places he went, the people he spoke to. Every time he brushed her off with excuses, she cataloged the lie, building a private archive of his deceit. At night, she scrawled across notebooks in frantic handwriting, filling page after page with arrows, names, fragments of conversations, building connections that blurred between fact and hallucination. She began to see Eva Heran's death not as a random act but as the keystone of a much larger design. And if Drew was tied to that design, then he was no longer just her betrayer, he was her captor, the one ensuring she remained powerless, the one who had dangled her children before her like bait only to snatch them away. This realization consumed her. She was no longer content to weep or rage. She became something colder, more methodical. In the hospital corridors, colleagues whispered about how she seemed changed, her once gentle presence replaced by an intensity that unsettled everyone around her. Patients felt her distance. Friends felt her suspicion. Even Michael, whose pain mirrored her own, became wary of the darkness in her eyes. Willow had stopped trying to survive her grief. She had begun living for vengeance. But her pursuit of the truth blurred the boundary between reality and madness. Some nights, the clues she followed led nowhere, mere phantoms of her own exhausted mind. Other nights, she stumbled upon whispers of meetings and transactions that confirmed her worst fears. She became unable to tell which discoveries were grounded in fact and which were born of her unraveling psyche. Yet to her, it no longer mattered. Reality and illusion had fused into one relentless purpose: uncover the network that had killed Judge Heran, expose the role Drew had played, and reclaim the fragments of her life by force if necessary. What terrified those who loved her was that she no longer seemed to care about saving herself. The Willow who once embodied compassion had given way to someone unrecognizable, a woman whose pain had calcified into something sharp and dangerous. She still spoke of Amelia and Wiley, still framed her obsession as a fight for her children, but the words had become incantations, justifications for the rage that consumed her. Her children had become both her reason and her weapon, their absence the fuel that allowed her to justify any act, no matter how unthinkable. And hovering over it all was Drew, the man at the center of her paradox. She hated him for the betrayal she now believed, hated him for the lies, and for the possibility that he had stood silently by as Judge Heran's death was orchestrated. But she also could not let him go, for in some broken part of her heart, he still represented the only bridge to the family she had lost. This duality made her dangerous not just to herself, but to everyone around her. Her love and her hate were now indistinguishable, two sides of the same storm that raged inside her. To the world of Port Charles, Willow's transformation was both shocking and inevitable. She had been remade by grief, betrayal, and the cruel manipulations of forces larger than herself. No longer just a victim, she had become something unpredictable, a ghost drifting between sanity and madness, justice and vengeance. Those who once pitied her now feared her, for they saw what she had become, a woman who would not stop until she uncovered the truth, even if it meant destroying herself and everyone else along the way. Heran's death had not just silenced the judge. It had unleashed Willow's reckoning, one that threatened to shake Port Charles to its foundations. The question that now defines Willow's entire existence is not merely whether she can salvage what is left of her life, but whether she can escape the grip of sin and deceit that has wrapped itself around her through Drew, and whether she can claw her way back to a place where clarity and truth still matter. Redemption once seemed like the natural endpoint for her story, a way to heal from years of trauma and to prove to herself and to her children that she was capable of being their anchor in a turbulent world. But Judge Eva Heran's death changed all of that. What should have been a victory for Willow, what should have been her chance to reclaim her children, instead became the very thing that condemned her. Ava's murder was not just another tragic loss, it was the dividing line between the old Willow, who lived with hope, and the new Willow, who now walks with vengeance in her heart. The crossroads before her is no longer about love versus grief or justice versus despair. It is far sharper, far crueler. Expose the truth, tear down the web of power that has manipulated her life from the shadows, and risk everything in the process or succumb to the darkness and allow it to swallow her whole, stripping her of not just her role as a mother but her very soul. The stakes are not measured in custody battles or courtrooms anymore. They are measured in sanity and survival, and in whether she can still look in the mirror without seeing a stranger staring back at her. To the fans of General Hospital, who have watched Willow for years as a gentle figure of sacrifice and compassion, her transformation is as riveting as it is horrifying. She has always been defined by her ability to love unconditionally, even when that love cost her dearly. Now, that same capacity has been twisted into something feral and consuming. Love has become obsession. Devotion has become fixation. Her soft voice has been replaced with a hard edge, and her once bright eyes now carry the storm of someone who has stared too long into betrayal. The image of Willow as a kind-hearted nurse is gone, replaced by the chilling outline of a woman who seems capable of anything. Drew's role in this collapse cannot be understated. He is not merely a man she trusted, he is the man she tethered her sanity to when she had nothing else left. He was her lifeline, the one who convinced her that Amelia and Wiley could still be hers if she only held on to him. And yet he was also the same man who betrayed her at the deepest possible level, entwining himself with Nina, her mother, and leaving Willow trapped in a psychological cage where hate and need coexist in equal measure. This paradox is what makes her journey so tragic. She cannot let him go because he represents her last, faint hope of getting her children back, but she cannot stay with him without destroying herself further. Every time she looks at him, she sees both salvation and damnation, both the father figure she thought she could trust and the executioner who helped dismantle her life. It is this entanglement with Drew that pushes Willow further into madness. She follows him at night, watching his movements with eyes sharpened by suspicion. She replays every word he has spoken, dissecting them for hidden meanings, looking for evidence that ties him to the murder of Eva Heran. She fills notebooks with theories, some drawn from facts, others from hallucinations, until she no longer knows which is which. Yet in her mind, all of it feels real. She sees Drew's shadow behind every locked door, every whispered conversation, every sudden silence in the room when she enters. The idea that he might have played a role in covering up Eva's murder is not just a suspicion anymore, it is an obsession. A truth that she has carved into her bones whether or not she can ever prove it. And what terrifies those around her is how much she has changed. Michael, once her partner in love and in grief, now sees a woman who is no longer the Willow he knew. Colleagues at the hospital whisper that she is dangerous, her temper unpredictable, her eyes filled with a hunger that has nothing to do with healing. Nina, too, has watched her daughter transform into something unrecognizable, though she herself is too entangled in her own sins to offer real help. Willow is becoming someone the world no longer recognizes, darker, sharper, colder. Judge Eva Heran's death was not only the silencing of a corrupt official, it was the spark that ignited Willow's transformation into a force that may one day burn Port Charles to the ground. Every step she takes toward uncovering the truth is a step further away from the woman she once was. She is not merely trying to prove her innocence or secure custody anymore, she is preparing for war. Her children remain her reason, but they are also her weapon, the justification for every act of vengeance she is now capable of committing. In her mind, every betrayal, every secret, every manipulation has led her to this point, and she will not stop until those responsible are brought down, no matter the cost. The tragedy is that in fighting to reclaim her children, she risks losing the very essence of what made her a mother to begin with. She risks losing her humanity, her compassion, her sanity. And those who love her most, Michael, Nina, even the children she longs to protect, may find that the greatest danger Willow now poses is not to her enemies, but to herself and to them. The fans are right to compare her to a crueler version of herself. She is no longer the gentle Willow who once embodied grace and light. She is a woman forged by betrayal, sharpened by grief, and consumed by obsession. She is willing to pay any price, cross any line, to claim back what she believes is rightfully hers. And in that dangerous resolve lies the chilling truth. Eva Heran's death did not just change the course of a custody battle, it transformed Willow into a potential threat to everyone she has ever loved. Her journey now is no longer about survival. It is about power, about truth, and about whether she will burn everything in her path before she can find the redemption that still flickers faintly in the distance. Every day that passes makes that faint light harder to see, and every step she takes into the abyss makes it more uncertain whether she will ever return. The death of Judge Eva Heran was not simply a scandal that rocked the halls of justice in Port Charles. It was the opening of a fault line that split lives apart and exposed layers of rot no one had been prepared to confront. For Willow, it marked the moment when grief and betrayal fused into something darker, when her quiet, almost naive belief in fairness and truth was ripped away and replaced with the fire of obsession. She had already endured enough heartbreak to destroy most people, but this loss carried a poison that seeped into her very soul. The more she stared into the shadow cast by Ava's death, the more she realized that the corruption surrounding her family was not an accident of circumstance but part of an elaborate design. One that linked her to people she both loved and despised. She could not stop thinking about the timing. Eva Heran had been preparing to testify, or at least to make a private record of her involvement with Sidwell. Willow had dared to believe that this would be her chance to regain Amelia and Wiley, to prove that the system had been rigged against her. But just as that sliver of hope appeared, Eva was silenced. The neatness of it, the precision, haunted Willow's nights. She wrote it off at first as paranoia, but the feeling only grew. She began to see Eva's murder not as an isolated crime, but as the tip of something much larger. As Willow pieced together scraps of rumor and fragments of overheard conversations, she stumbled onto a terrifying possibility. Sidwell had not been acting alone, and more importantly, he had not been the true architect of the bribery scandal. He had been following orders, protecting others. And the man who seemed to appear again and again in the background of those stories was Drew. Her Drew. The man she had relied upon, the man she had allowed herself to trust even after his betrayals, even after the shame of learning he had been with Nina. He was no longer just the flawed figure she clung to out of desperation. He was now beginning to look like someone who had actively participated in keeping her powerless. The discovery left her hollow. How could she reconcile the man who whispered promises of bringing her children home with the man who might have had a hand in ensuring she never saw them again? She vacillated wildly between fury and denial, between wanting to believe she was mistaken, and knowing, deep in her bones, that she was not. The duality broke something inside her. At times she would scream into the void of her empty apartment, clawing at the walls as though she could scratch away the lies. At other times she simply sat in silence, clutching old photographs of Amelia and Wiley, whispering their names as if invoking them would anchor her to reality. Her colleagues at General Hospital began to notice her deterioration. Once known for her gentle bedside manner, Willow now drifted through the corridors with a kind of feral intensity. She snapped at coworkers, lashed out at patients, and in one harrowing incident, shoved a fellow nurse who had tried to intervene when she nearly administered the wrong medication. Rumors began to swirl. Was Willow still fit to work? Could she be trusted in her current state? Behind closed doors, administrators began discussing her future, and whispers of Shadybrook or Ferncliff as necessary interventions grew louder. But Willow was deaf to all of it. Her mind was consumed by the idea that Drew was part of the machinery behind Ava's death, and she was determined to uncover the proof. She began shadowing him, following him when he claimed to be running errands, watching the way he slipped into meetings with men whose faces she did not recognize. At night she would scribble furiously in notebooks, drawing webs of connection between Sidwell, Eva, Drew, and unnamed others who seemed to drift in and out of the narrative. The diagrams blurred fact and fantasy, yet to Willow they were gospel. Her descent into obsession was complete, and she no longer cared whether anyone else believed her. For Michael, this transformation was unbearable to witness. He had known Willow as a woman who, despite her traumas, carried herself with a kind of quiet grace. Now he saw her unravel daily, her eyes flickering with paranoia, her words heavy with venom, her actions unpredictable. At first he tried to intervene, to calm her, to remind her of the children who needed her. But Willow's focus had shifted. Amelia and Wiley were no longer her grounding, for Sethi were her justification. Everything she did, every reckless act, she told herself was for them. Michael began to fear that the children had become symbols to her rather than living, breathing souls, and that terrified him more than anything. The more Michael pulled away, the more Willow fixated on Drew. Drew became her entire world's source of her torment, and the key to her salvation. She clung to him even as she despised him, unable to break free of the paradox he represented. And Drew, for his part, did nothing to set her free. Whether through calculation or cowardice, he continued to feed her just enough hope to keep her tethered, even as his lies and silences spoke volumes. Eva Heran's death had set all of this into motion, but the ripple effects were far from over. Poor Charles was beginning to feel the tremors of the conspiracy, though most still had no idea of the scale of what was unfolding. For Willow, however, the picture was becoming clearer, even if her mind blurred the details. She knew now that she was not simply fighting for her children, she was fighting for her soul, her sanity, and the right to define who she was in a world determined to twist her into something monstrous.